In the event that you suffer a data breach, okay, then I am considered to suffer a data breach, okay? And it's very well and strictly laid out inside GDPR. The effect this is having globally, okay, is that European organisations are now putting GDPR compliance into their business-to-business relationships and their business-to-business contacts with organisations based outside of the EU.
Hey there, welcome to Talking Business right here at Best Practice. I've got Rod Organ with me from Astrum, and we're talking about everything privacy, ISO 27001, information security. You are somebody who's been given this task to look into information security. Maybe it's part of a tender, maybe it's part of your organisation. You're somebody that's trying to figure out and understand what's going on with GDPR. Does it apply to you? You might be a construction business, you might be a service business, you might be a market research business. We're going to talk about some basics of ISO 27001 and information security and privacy. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Kobe. Pleasure to be here.
Tell me a little bit about your history, and tell me, like, you know, what got you interested in this area?
Okay. I came to privacy and security through IT, through the traditional IT route, running trading floors, building data centers. And then recently did security work, a lot of security insourcing for a large bank. Privacy was something that I'd always been interested in. Privacy is very much about individual rights and how the individual's data is protected. And it was something that I was always been interested in. The recent GDPR implementations in May of last year, and of course of the Australian implementation in February last year, has made them extremely relevant to how we do business. And to me, privacy and security is just really good business.
Talk me through what the global landscape looks like. So is Australia ahead of the curve, or are we behind? Like, where are we?
That's a very good question. The European Union's General Data Protection Regulations, GDPR,
yep.
Very good, were implemented on May 25th, 2018.
Yep.
Okay, and they have completely changed the privacy landscape. Okay, they are spreading throughout the world. They were originally obviously designed to look after European citizens and people based in Europe. But there's a little known or a little understood fact of GDPR. Under GDPR, if I collect data in Europe, okay, and I give that to you, Kobe, in Australia as my data processor, I'm required to ensure that you are taking all the correct actions to make sure that data is properly looked after, and that the privacy rights of those people who I collected data, okay, are being maintained. In the event that you suffer a data breach, okay, then I am considered to suffer a data breach, okay? And it's very well and strictly laid out inside GDPR. The effect this is having globally, okay, is that, and a number of my clients do this, European organisations are now putting GDPR compliance into their business-to-business relationships and their business-to-business contacts with organisations based outside of the EU. Australian organisations, Indian, Chinese, Philippines, all that kind of stuff. The secondary effect that's having too is that global companies have had to make a choice. Do we segregate our European data and apply GDPR regulations to the European data, or do we aggregate it all and make the whole company GDPR compliant? And invariably, it's too hard to segregate the data. They like to aggregate the data. So invariably, that means that these companies have all elected, the major corporates have all elected to become GDPR compliant. Okay, so that has a knock-on effect to subsidiaries based in countries like Australia, okay, to branch offices and that kind of thing based in countries like Australia, and it has a knock-on effect to suppliers of those global organisations, because now they're getting asked, and this might be an Australia to US transaction, or it might be an Australia to Australia transaction, but now they're getting asked, are you GDPR compliant? The good thing about GDPR, and particularly in relation to ISO 27001, the conversations are very similar. The people that you have the conversations with are very similar. It's, if I was to put in a 27001 project, I would also at the same time suggest to the person that we do a privacy project, okay? The benefit of that, of course, is that you've not only secured the data and you're managing the data, but you've also ensured your customers' privacy rights. Okay, and for them, you can then go back to your customer, and a lot of people do use this and market this and say, guys, we're looking after your data, your rights are enshrined, we're protecting your data. I have one client who says, we're protecting your data in the same way that we protect our own data. Okay, so privacy will only get larger. Okay, privacy is the business representation of security plus additional customer rights. You know, it's security plus customer relationships and business-to-business relationships. The Americans, in response to GDPR, are looking to upgrade their privacy laws. Okay, we put out our amendment to the Privacy Act. Australia has the advantage of being able to watch the GDPR regulations and potentially pick the best out of them and then implement those as well. With cybercrime growth, with more and more data online, privacy is something that's now part of the business landscape, and it's only going to get bigger as opposed to shrinking.
So when we actually talk about an individual person, what would be the first column of the database, if you like, of information we might have that starts to trigger that it is data? When we talk about like privacy and people and that sort of stuff.
Yep. That's a good question. It's really about the intent for the privacy laws is to protect people from harm through inappropriate people having access to their data. Okay, that's what it comes down to. Now, as a person who has collected data, and as an organisation, a company, and whatever, you're expected to take what's called reasonable steps. Okay, which is it's a really important definition that should be taken note of. Okay, so privacy law does not lay down a set of prescriptive actions. It expects you to interpret the data that you have, okay, and then take reasonable steps to secure it. Okay, reasonable steps is actually in a way a blessing for us because it means that we don't have to put in a set of prescriptive actions. We can go to every business and say, what data do you have? Okay, what is the risk if that data was to be released onto the internet or into an open area? Okay, and what are the reasonable steps that we can take? Okay, to help secure that data. Okay, and that gives you a point where you can talk to any compliance agency and say, we're taking reasonable steps, as long as, of course, as you document them, which is something you and I both know lots about.
Sure.
Yeah. So my original point of anything used to identify an individual, names the obvious point, address, things such as job title, organisation that they work at, are considered unique identifiers that could identify any information. There's also indirect identifiers, so a combination of, in your case, Kobe, company, and job title. Okay, your name's not in there, but people can put those two pieces of information together and identify you from it. Okay, so there's both direct identifiers and indirect identifiers that we need to look after.
So, just because of social media, where does the line stop with, say, for example, something like, you know, in professional services, well, not professional services, but in professions, say LinkedIn. So someone puts up their LinkedIn profile, they've got their first name, their last name, their, you know, we're just talking about job title, the company they work at, how long they've worked there, that they still currently work there, and they put that out publicly. Does that create confusion?
That really goes to the topic of consent. Okay, and consent's very important. You might have seen some recent GDPR-related fines issued to Google over consent. Again, that's worth a Google search. So if I'm putting my stuff up on LinkedIn, okay, I'm consenting. LinkedIn will also have a privacy policy and also a data processing policy that when I signed to the service, I've actually accepted those. So for me as an individual to put them out there and put them in the public domain, okay, then I've consented, so organisations such as LinkedIn are fine. If somebody data scraped and then assembled and aggregated that data, that then becomes another question, and that is unclear at this stage. If you have data scraped, aggregated the data and then used it for your own purpose, and then you get breached, or you've manipulated the data for your own purpose and then you get breached, potentially that is a privacy breach.
Yeah, and I think the way that I was thinking about going with this was, I don't believe it's it's not a defence to say that the data you've got is data that's the same that person has put up on LinkedIn, because it comes back to how you collected it. If you collected the data from LinkedIn because it was publicly available, data scraping, that's one thing. But I guess the point I want to make is it's not a defence for you to say the data we've got is the same as what's on LinkedIn, so we're okay. That's not correct, because your collection means was different.
That's entirely accurate. It's worth considering a couple of things. GDPR in particular has what's called a data controller definition. And a data controller is the person who has the means and purpose of collecting the data. Okay? So I put my information on LinkedIn. LinkedIn acquired it for a purpose. You've come along and collected it, but you have a different purpose, and you're starting to manipulate the data for your own benefit. Okay? That's when privacy law starts to kick in. Also, you're going to talk about things such as consent. Okay? You might have collected the data. Yes, it was in the public domain, and then you might have used it for a purpose that I may not have consented to. The recent Google fine related to people subscribing to a Google service and then being subscribed to other services without their consent. Okay, if you start to use that data for a purpose, okay, that I didn't consent to, that's when potentially you have a privacy issue. Okay. Again, if you do things like practice privacy by design, before you even go down that path of collecting the data, when you're thinking about it, you examine the privacy aspect of it. There used to be a saying that there are two ways to acquire information, and that is system vulnerabilities and people. Okay, two weaknesses in a network used to be the saying. Okay, I believe now there's actually a third way, and that's your data in uncontrolled fashion, out there on the web. Mm-hmm. Okay, but there are known to be state actors. Go and ask the government. There are known to be state actors that are actively seeking ways into organisations, and human phishing and human interaction is still the most effective way to access an organisation. And these guys will look for the weakest point. Okay, so the weakest point could be the office junior who's just got a phishing email. Okay, and he's pressed go, and then suddenly, bang, they have his credentials. And from credentials, they've got access to the network, and then away we go. Okay, so it is a good point to raise that, yes. Industrial espionage, state-based actors, okay, are important, and they will not discriminate. They will find the weakest, easiest point to get into the network, and that can be a person who you wouldn't think would be a target. Okay, the flip side of that is the spear phishing, when you have senior execs who get targeted, and some of the phishing emails are incredibly sophisticated. They look legitimate. In my career, I've seen senior execs spear phished on what I would have fallen for as a legitimate email. Okay, so having control and having insurance mechanisms across your entire organisation from top to bottom, again, it's just good business, and in a way, it's your insurance policy.
We do talk a lot about data, and we're making the assumptions, but it's, have you got plans for someone's office? Have you got the keys for a government office in your office, and someone's got information about where those keys are? That's information. So it's those sorts of things around. So there's I guess what I'm saying is there a close link to just physical security?
Physical security is important. It's a key control inside ISO 27001. And it's something that the standard takes quite seriously. And absolutely, physical access to a site or to a source of information is one of the best ways to extract information. So 100%. Your point before about some of the assets, designs, brand, plans, all that kind of stuff. Malicious people with malicious intent, they'll steal a lot of things, and they'll often steal things that seem to be unrelated, okay, in order to build a profile of a particular person. The stuff they love most of all is the stuff that is difficult to change, for obvious reasons. The most stolen piece of information is actually health data, okay? Why is it so valuable to them? Because you can't change it. You can't change your blood type. You can't change DNA structure and all that kind of thing. Similarly, for organisations, if you've invested a lot of time into a design or into a business plan or something like that, then that in and of its nature is valuable. Okay, it's potentially valuable to your competitors as well. So that's the kind of stuff that you've got to protect, and both digitally and physically.
Going through this process and jumping in and just getting started is what we talked about at the beginning of this conversation. So, I want you guys to be thinking about that. Just get in and get started. But there's when you're doing the executive risk assessment, you also want to think, well, what are they going to do with that information? And if it's commercial in confidence information, and they're choosing to steal it instead of get out in the market and actually physically execute against you, just basically, implement and grow their organisation. If it's from a competition perspective, they're probably wasting time trying to get your stuff instead of figuring out how to do them themselves.
To that point, the term reasonable steps is your friend. Okay, there is no compliance standard that says, Kobe, you cannot be breached. You are not allowed to be breached. Okay, all of the compliance standards assume that someone will get breached. Okay, what you need to do is to take reasonable steps to prevent a breach that are relevant to your organisation, that are within the context of your organisation. Okay, so and the first thing that you can do there is work out what your context is and what your risks are. Okay, and then you build a program, and the program can also be implemented in bite-sized chunks. You can prioritise. You can say, okay, we've got risks here, here, and here. Okay, let's chunk this up, and we'll implement this change in this period, this change in this period, this change in this period. If you run it all as part of a program, you can again go back to your compliance authorities and say, I have a program. It looks like this. I'm currently executing here. Again, you have an argument that says you're taking reasonable steps relative to the context of your organisation. Unfortunately, the web is a place where if you don't know what you're doing, you can end up exploited. Okay, so it's up to us to work with younger, older citizens or people less aware of of some of the dangers and some of the issues and why they get marketing calls and why they end up on mailing lists and all that kind of stuff. So it's up to us to help educate them. The good thing is, the more you do, the more you know. And again, Google is your friend. If you're scared of social media, if you're scared of Facebook, get onto Google and say Facebook privacy settings, and it will show you, okay, how to change your Facebook privacy settings, LinkedIn privacy settings, the same thing. You can actually use Google and the tools to do some basic steps to lock down your privacy settings. And again, I have a rule that with things such as social media itself, it's only the people I know. That's it. And even then, I think very, very carefully before I put something up as to, do I want to take this down in a week or two or whatever, or in a year or in 10 years or something like that.
Yeah. So what, in terms of an organisation getting started, top tips and tricks, what might be three top tips from you for 101 get started?
101 get started, okay. First of all, okay, the very first thing is the mindset of we don't have to necessarily know the end or the whole journey. And the journey won't become clear until you actually get started. So from an organisation, set yourself aside some time or some budget or some people to investigate what it is that you're going to need to do. And that is effectively getting started. If you had an issue from that point on, you could go to any kind of regulator and say, hey guys, I've started. I've started this journey of reasonable steps. And that's a far better position than, yeah, well, we thought about it and we knew we had to do it, but we kind of hadn't got around to it, at which point you do not have any opportunity to say, I've taken reasonable steps. You just take your lumps, okay? So the first thing is, and perhaps what I'd suggest to any organisation is set aside some time, some money, some effort to just map it out, to investigate it a little bit. And that's going to give you a much clearer path to what you have. Your point before, Kobe, about how much data do I have? Everybody has data. Most people don't know how much data they have. and where it is. Okay, so that's point one, and that's the segue into point two. Okay, is let's investigate the data we have and try and understand what data we have, and that can be a simple set of questions. When we do this at corporate level, sometimes we use software. A lot of the time, we sit down with stakeholders and we say, you collect this data or you have this application, what do you use it for? What's in it? You know, why is it important to your business? And in a half-hour conversation or a 1-hour conversation with people, they invariably go, oh yeah, and we use it for this, and we collect that, and we do this with it, and oh, it's used here for this, and oh, this guy uses it for something else. So that's the next point is get some kind of understanding of where your data is, what you use it for, and all that kind of stuff. Invariably, you will find as you go through the journey that your data is potentially being used for more than what you think it is. Okay, but at least if you know where it is, okay, again, you turn this into bite-sized chunks. I know I have 5 sets of data in my organisation. Which one is most relevant? Which one is most important? Which one carries the greatest risk? This one does. Number 2, let's start there. Okay,
great.
And break it into bite-sized chunks.
Great, and I think my point is, don't be scared of ISO 27001. It's a guideline. It's meant to be there to help you. So it's not something you need to be fearful of. So grab yourself a copy of ISO 27001. You can purchase that from our online store. We have a beautiful hard copy available for you. Put it on your table. You can use it to take notes. You can use it to have a conversation. So I think leaning on ISO 27001 starts to put walls around what you need to do, and it says, you know, you can keep some sort of size to it. It's not never ending. So it's a great standard to follow. So. As always, with our Talking Business segments here at Best Practice, we've got this amazing audience. They're always full of comments. They're always full of advice. Yeah. What advice, you know, using this great resource that we have, what advice, have you got any questions for them? Anything you want to know, anything you want to learn, anything you want to improve?
That's an excellent question. It's very good. I'd most of all like to know, I'd like to find out more about how privacy and security impacts these businesses, why it's important to these businesses and all that kind of stuff, and what are the challenges to getting started, okay? I'd also like to know, we always find when we talk with people, some of the most interesting and unusual uses of data. So I'd love to hear if anybody's got a really unusual and way out in left field use of data. I'd love to hear examples of that and all that kind of stuff. And also what's most effective thus far. You know, what's most effective with people. You generally find that organisations that understand why they're doing it, okay, and what the purpose of this is, and everybody in the organisation is bought in, have far better and far more efficient and effective programs. So I'd really like to understand what messages get through to the people in your organisations, and you know how you get them to buy in.
Absolutely, I'd love to hear that too. That's one of the greatest questions I think of anything is, how do you get your team engaged? How do you get your team involved? You know, what have you done to have any project, in fact, not just an information security, data protection, privacy project? How do you get your team on board? How do you get buy-in from senior level management? How do you get buy-in from your team that are part of the organisation, so that your organisation is a fun place to work, you enjoy the change management that goes on every day. This has been Talking Business right here on Best Practice TV. If you liked the things we were talking about, hit that like button, smash the subscribe button. Mate, it's been a pleasure.
Absolutely.
It's been absolutely fantastic. I think we're going to do this again sometime as we build out some more content for you on information security. And if I don't see you before, I'll see you next time right here on Best Practice TV. Bye for now.